back together, reunited for a fun topic of in season. Although it's February, here we come in season. Start thinking about what that looks like. So obviously, even though we're talking about in season, the reason this is relevant for us is that, of course, the colleges at this point are in season, and most of the athletes that we train across the country, this is their high school season time of year. So not applicable to every single athlete. There's obviously exceptions. There are some states that do high school season in the summer or in the fall. But what we're going to talk about today is relevant when you're thinking about in-season training and sort of what that should look like. So we just thought we would talk a little bit about some of the things that happen in season. So the demands on the athlete and the repercussions of those demands, some of which we can control and some of which we can't control. I think that's sort of an important part of it. Some of which we can control, like we actually can control, but we can't because of our circumstances. And some we, can't actually control regardless of our circumstances. And then what training or player development looks like during season. I think just, how we have supported athletes during that time of year, how we help colleges support athletes that time of year. So that is generally the concepts that we wanted to talk about. So first of all, maybe if we just lay out, either one of you, what training looks like now. So technically, as we're recording this now, our athletes are still doing off-season, preseason type work. What training looks like now. And then we can get into how that changes, because I think one of the big hangups that lots of families have when they think about training in season, what we've had to help colleges with is like they think about replicating this system and putting it in a season, and that just feels insane. So let's first talk about what training looks like without season, and then we can talk about maybe some of the things that we take into season and change and what that looks like. So Ashley, I'll let you take it. You can do pitching,
Sure.
And then I can make any changes for hitting.
Yeah. Off season is a gradual build of volume. It's not just all high intensity volume, because what we're really trying to do is to maximize the tools. So we've identified what tools we're going after. It's not just like, let's target every single thing equally. What are we looking to target coming out of this off season? What tools do we want to grow? And so there's a lot of like pitch development concepts where you are doing very specific like pitch design sessions. You're working through some weighted balls. You're going low intensity, high intensity. There's a lot of feel. There's a lot of back and forth. And generally just volume builds. And so in some ways, volume gets higher, but it's this combination of sort of like a lower and higher intensity type of work. As we go into preseason, which really should be just a few weeks before season, we don't want to like spend 6 weeks in preseason. We need like every bit of off season that we can get. Essentially, volume will then start to taper down, but the majority of it really is going to be at high intensity. You can kind of think of it as like, we don't maybe fully pull the plug on tools, but there is some sense of like, now these are your tools. We wanted that pitch to get to X, but it only got to Y. It is what it is. You have to learn to leverage Y now, and you have to understand what that means for you and what other pitches now, pair with that, tunnel well with that, where you have to be able to command that pitch in order to leverage where it is. So there's definitely some element of where like you can keep working on it a little bit, but at that point, we're not really expecting these like crazy jumps and changes in any of the ball flight data. And so pulling the plug on this like off-season pitch development concept, then talking about leveraging what is available to you. You're mostly doing that at high intensity. You're not trying to fatigue the athlete. You want them to go into season with a full tank, essentially. And so it's not about fatiguing them. So volume builds throughout off season. It comes down a little bit in preseason, which again should just be a few weeks. It's really about kind of leveraging these tools as a whole, staying at high intensity. And that is, workouts can essentially maybe be shorter, maybe not, because you might be throwing, breaking. So there's probably more rest time built in. So maybe even like duration stays the same, but they are built out differently. When we then cross over into in season, that might be sort of like getting ahead of ourselves here. When we go and cross over, now the pendulum has swung all the way in one direction, where everything that pitcher is doing is about high intensity. It's volume is high, intensity is high. We're working on what tools they're doing well with, what tools they're not. And so typically then when they actually come back into training, everything is just low, 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 because it's so extreme on the other side. So volume is often is low. Intensity is often low. We're trying to essentially create the other side of that seesaw, if you will, or pendulum, to now balance things out for them a little bit. It's very targeted. It's very specific to the information they give about what's going well and what's not. If things are just cruising, it might stay a little more generic for them to just hold their tools where they are. But that's typically what it looks like. And you're right, Krista. If you thought about if I was doing the workout from December 12th on March 12th, that feels impossible. Well, because it is, and that's maybe not impossible, but it's not what your body needs at that point.
Yeah. I was thinking too, like this time of year, we get a lot of our athletes, especially in like northern parts of the country. So kind of where we're located and north of us, northeast, who are starting to play games in domes. And everyone thinks it's a good idea because we're testing things or it's more fun to play games. Like I think we have a lot of conversations this time of year of like, she didn't do good. And it's so challenging because I think training is not built to peak all the time. So we might have athletes right now, like you'll see tons of posts coming out of our social media this time of year of PRs. And we've talked about this on other podcast episodes. Like this is the time our athletes are starting to peak. Hopefully, if we've, been able to control, as we've already talked in high school, especially, this is a really hard age group to, control all the variables. And so it's not always a linear path, but generally, if we are in control of most variables, this is the time of year where our athletes are starting to hit PRs and exit velocity and pitch velocity. They're starting to see some things because the training is starting to ramp up on the strength and conditioning side to be a little more higher intensity. In hitting, we're getting a little bit, we're pulling away some of the lower intensity stuff. And so they just start to be on this. But I think about, and I try to describe this to the parents sometimes on the hitting side, our hitting training still very much is learning at this time of year, like putting them in environments, and not to get into a different topic, but where they are failing actively and we're trying to make adjustments and change. That doesn't match up to an at-bat. Like it just doesn't match up. And so we will hit a time of year where it's like, okay, a lot of our reps are just straight on the machine, lower, rounds that mirror a little bit. And I always say, like, we can't mirror it exactly in here. And so, what's going to mirror it exactly is live. Once you get into that with your teams, which is you will get into, and you will have a few weeks of that in practice. But for us, we're not at that point yet. And so I almost think if you message me now and give us credit for hitting, that's a fluke. So that's cool that you feel good, but that's a fluke that you did good right now. And if you do bad, that's also not tied to, like, it's just none of it's tied to it because your training is not matching that. And so, and when we say training, I think the hard part of thinking about in-season training is we just have thought about, like, I go with my instructor for 30 minutes. I go to do this for an hour. And when we say training, we just really mean like the system. And right now our system around you is still in development. And so you can't just plop into a game and think like, here I am, like I'm going to do so great. You can't do that from a volume standpoint. You can't do that from an intensity standpoint, and probably your results are not going to match that. And so you want everything to be aligning in that direction. So we're moving as we get closer to season for it to align in whatever way it needs to for that. And so for pitching, you're going way down in volume, way down in intensity because most pitchers are doing so much of that in the game. In hitting, we don't go quite as low in intensity because we still need that higher intensity thing. We just pull volume down if we can. That's something that's not always controlled well in practices, but we pull all of that down a little bit to match more. We don't have all that time now. Very similar in hitting, we're in it. So you better know what failure looks like very quickly, get challenged very quickly, try to tap into that very quickly, and then go into like game prep. If you're in college and you have like the tools more, you could be prepping, you could be watching that pitcher, you could be trying to pick pitches, you could be facing the spin she has, whatever. But that's all you have time for at that time. So, but the intensity still stays up in hitting. I think that's one difference is that we would like you definitely, and we kind of have talked about this, should not be in season. Like, let me go swing off the tee because my volume and intensity is so high. You take 6 swings.
Well, your hitters don't have workload issues.
Right.
I mean, it's just totally different.
So it's like, don't create workload issues.
Don't create workload issues. Exactly.
Don't
yes.
create workload issues because that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And you don't have time for your hitters to take 42 swings to figure things out this time of year. Like, if we're in that place, we're not in a great place. So that's how I think it just changes a little bit more.
The two scenarios that I see, and this kind of goes back to one of the discussion we already had where we were talking about like live, and it was a big theme where a lot of head coaches that we work with that are not the pitching coach, there was definitely this like, I want more live. And then the pitching coach and I were trying to like, okay, at the end of the day, that person is the boss. So we can't say no, but like, how can we have this conversation of like how to, so in some circumstances, and everybody's, the X's and O's logistics of each program is always different. But in some circumstances, it's like, you want them to throw live, fine. As long as they are under, like, we have the right expectations. Like, there was a program where the first week they were like, she struggled with being able to throw that pitch through the zone and out of the zone. Like the two versions of that pitch. I'm like, when in the world why would we expect her to be able to do that? Like she just got back from break where everything was just about maximizing that pitch as just generally. Is it in the right velo range? Can we get it to break the way we need it to? Does she understand its purpose and how we want it to tunnel, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? That's what we've worked on. So like, if you are going to put them in a circumstance, if your team has a doubleheader in a dome on January, whatever, it's not going to kill anybody. And so it's mostly of like, but you should, right. Yeah.
Hopefully. Depend on the volume.
But what I mean is, yes, unless the volume is ridiculous. However, but like you should know what lines up and what doesn't. You can't say like something that has nothing to do with this like off-season approach to programming. The other side that I see, this has come up multiple times with some athletes recently that I'm just like, wow, I really forget what pitching lessons are like.
Yeah.
Holy hell. They can be wild. I forgot how just like week by week they are oftentimes. Yeah. And I have had some multiple conversations recently. And this one that I'm thinking of in my head is an athlete whose high school season starts. It's a warmer climate. So like, our athletes were like, oh yeah, their first game's like March 20th in Chicago. We're like, yeah, Godspeed. It's probably like, maybe, I don't know, maybe they will. But we know end of March is the earliest because of weather. But this is a warmer climate. So like, her first game is like March 9th or something. And like, it's going to happen, right? So she's basically about 4 or 5 weeks out of that time period. And when I asked what she's doing, it's a remote athlete. So a lot of times our remote athletes will also like have someone nearby that they go to locally. And she's like, well, we usually don't throw full. We're just like working on my mechanics the whole time, And so I'm like, can you give me examples? And I mean, it's like these like very broken down drills where, you're just like doing things. And I'm like, I guess it's your example of T, sort of, but at least a T is a full swing, right? I would put it underneath of that. And so it's not just that we're like, don't spend your time working on a movement that never happens in the motion. There's no translation there, XYZ. That's a whole nother podcast. But at this time, when you are in what world, like that drives me insane when it's like, athletes need to be better informed. They need to be able to go to a pitching instructor or, some sort of coach and understand that if you do not have a thought process of where I am time of year and just generally, forget the specifics of what I need, generally what training should be looking like for me right now, that's a major red flag. So I have seen both circumstances and a lot of it recently in the high school level and the college level of like what we're expecting these athletes to literally be at peak performance. Like I wrote this in, we use like a Slack communication for our athletes. And I have been writing a lot recently of just like reminder, what you just reported on from your game last week, that level of command over your craft at that level when you're in competition isn't exactly where we are right now in programming. So keep that in mind. Like I have written that so many times, like we're not asking you to do that yet in training. Right. So there should be a gap. That side. And then the other side of like, yes, I've been working on my like my one knee drills, or I've been working on just like a balance beam. I'm like, what in the hell? Like, you at this point, do you know if that drop ball is better? Like, oh, I haven't gotten to that yet. I'm like, might want to hurry that one up, you know?
Yeah.
I think
So
from
both sides.
Go ahead.
I think from kind of like, I just like to take a big step back. I think even further, just from coaching, but just like performance team in general. I think this applies to strength coaches. It applies to your sports medicine staff. Like, I think of the college level, but I'm also thinking about the high school athlete, you know, starting obviously this sort of preseason time now, as we kind of come out of the real deep out of season work, and we start, you know, that sort of neurological ramp up for in season. I think what gets missed often is, like, we use the words like nonlinear a lot. Like, the journey is nonlinear. And hearing both of you talk, I kept thinking, because of course I did a graph in my head of where, you know, let's pretend we're starting from today in terms of like, we're coming out of this true off season, you know, pitching and hitting, their volume has come down, strength and conditioning has taken the lead, you know, but we are seeing PRs because the amount of, you know, rest these kids are getting, we're getting the right, activation for them, and just simply like game volume has come down. And so their sort of general adaptation, it's on its way up, and it needs to be. And so as we start to get to preseason, you know, we continue to accelerate that. The conversations I'm often having are, I've had maybe some pain or injury, or I play another sport, and my off season was not quite what it needed to be to give me this general adaptation to make me ready for, I'm just going to pretend, March 1st. And the reason I use that first week of softball is that oftentimes that first week is tryouts, it's hell week, it's put whatever jokingly nickname you want to put on it. It is this massive spike, right, in volume and intensity. We do our best with our out-of-season training and our off-season training to prepare our athletes for that, because we know that there are some programs that at the high school level that do that. That's just what they're going to go into, and that's up to the athlete and parent to figure out if that's what their vibe is. But when we talk about then, okay, we're in season, if we don't have that massive spike, or we get out of that massive spike unscathed, right? We don't have a soft tissue injury, a hamstring strain, something that tells us our body maybe went a little too quick, you know, out the gate. We're just trying to maintain, right? If we dip a little bit, we want to tap into some strategies, whether it's, you know, I really want us to have a conversation about what recovery actually means. So like recovery and workload management and in-season lifting. And we have these strategies that we can give our athletes to tap into. And the conversations I have the most, because they're centered around health, is, all right, you've got a couple of weeks maybe before your summer season transition. And so what you don't want is to go all the way back down, right? You don't want to have this like huge peak and then I just wear myself down because I'm missing these components of in-season lifting. My workload is out of control. And I know easy for me to say versus do, but advocating for, you know, pitch load, workload, whatever it might be. And we see these kids that are like, meh, in May, right? We're like, okay, time to go in the summer, right? And they're starting from literally ground zero, right? They're back down to being super fatigued. Their movement quality is not great. They're in pain. They have soreness. And so we say nonlinear, but we don't want it to go all the way back to zero. It needs to be this like out of season up, in season, maintain the best you can, give yourself a breather when you need, and keep going up, keep maintaining, keep going up, keep maintaining. And like this cycle of all the things and then nothing and then all the things on a much larger scale is so devastating. It's why like winter camps are so hard where they're going to throw live. It's a mismatch. You guys said that. It's a mismatch of what they're prepared for just in their general adaptation for physical activity and what we're asking them to do. And it's why those mismatches are so hard to navigate, because their bodies literally just aren't prepared for that. It's an interruption to that, you know, building of good stress for them at a much, much larger view.
Yeah. I was going to say, one of the things I think during this time period, and as you're describing, and I think we can get into some of the specifics of how we manage all of that in season or try, is that there's only so much these families can do. And so I think one of the things is like, we sit on these, obviously this podcast is for us to kind of advocate for the best case scenario, you know, and I think right now we know that the system is not, it's not even it's definitely not the best case scenario. It's very far from even like medium case scenario. And I think that one thing that's important though is that as I reference these like dome games and stuff, when families come and they're like, you know, Sally played this weekend on Sunday and her timing was really off for hitting. What is important for me is not to be like, well, obviously, like, why is she even playing games? Like, because that's not helpful. One, they might not ever find a team to play on if that's their standards. Like, that's just not. And also, like, some of the scenarios that kids are doing, like, I could say you should never play any indoor games, but some of the scenarios that kids are doing, they're doing like one Friday night game. It's fun. They're young. Like, it's just like whatever, as long as the expectation. So it's a little bit more of like, okay, when it skews really far, which we do see, like we have pitchers now throwing 400, 500 pitches on a weekend. Like, we have to have a real conversation. Like, there's just in no scenario is that appropriate right now. It's just, it's, you know, it's not appropriate. And so all we can do is say, like, that's not great. Like, this is not great for these reasons. Ultimately, you get to make the decision, but here's the reasons we would try to advocate against that. But the other way to come at it is just this education and conversation around what to expect in each of these times of year. And I think without shaming or making people feel bad. I read this thread that was up the other day, and I'm blanking now who posted it, but I shared it, so you could go to my X account and look at whatever I shared. But and I felt it like in my soul. It was about kids like having to just basically constantly disappoint adults in the current system, because it's like, I'm expected to go up to training all the time, but then also I'm expected to have 100% attendance at my travel ball. I'm also expected to do all my homework. I'm expected to do all these things. And then the person responsible for each of those silos is like disappointed at me when I don't. So it's like, I was going to share more. I ended up just saying like, I felt this in my soul, and I didn't share I had typed up a little bit more, but my sons are 8 and 7. They don't do any like travel ball, no year round type of thing, but we're starting to do more and more rec type of thing. So they're in swimming now, they're in hockey now, we're doing baseball again. You know, we have all of my son wants to do theater, like we have all these things. And I was saying to their dad the other day, like, I am already feeling stressed about bedtime. Like, we are doing one thing at night and it's starting to cut into their ability to finish their homework in first and third grade, to bed at the time that they're supposed to. And so like, I had to consider that, but it's hard as a parent, because you're like, well, I also want them to do these things, and I also want them to get their homework done, and I also want them to do all these things. And so it's a challenging place to be in. And so I think there's just, you know, for whoever's listening to hear that we're going to keep fighting against the system a little bit, because right now it's bad for these kids. Like, it's putting them in a bad situation physically, mentally, emotionally. Like, it's just not the right system in the ways that we talk about on this podcast frequently, with the requirements and demands that are in them, the lack of education at certain levels about what we're asking of our athletes. And so that's a part of it. And also, we see and empathize with you in this system of like just trying to do the best you can for your kids. And so it's not just like feel shame if your kid is playing in a dome tournament now. It's like, no, it's not great. Why are we playing in a dome tournament in January? But okay, let's see what we can control in that. Let's set our expectations. Let's do what we can.
Risk reward.
Yeah. Krista, I agree with that. But I have kind of I have two perspectives on that. I totally get it. You're like, basically you have to pick who you're willing to disappoint.
Yeah.
And care less about one. And I'm going to make the argument of like, it's not disappointing. I don't feel like I'm so disappointed when people do this, but I am like, damn it. Because when you're thinking about in season, when someone is trained all winter and they are like, I'm in high school season now, so I'm like dropping, I'm like ending my like membership, my account, and pausing it until I'm done with season. I definitely think, damn it, because I mentioned this on the call the other day, or on a meeting we had the other day. If high school season was the season, it was the season we're all striving for, and then after that, there's this break, we get to then rebuild, whatever. Maybe it'd be fine. You know, like you might be fine taking the training adaptations you took all winter and then riding them through the high school season. The end might be challenging. You're going to have to gut it out. You're going to be fatigued if you're not doing in-season training, but it's not. And everyone knows it's not. No one is like, who cares about my summer? I just want to crush high school. I've never heard someone say that. Never. So maybe they're out there, but like if they are, probably not listening to this podcast, you know? So I think that the challenge is that what we know happens is like, this isn't a guess. This is based off of years and years of data. You will regress in all or some of the following categories. Fatigue, meaning, you know, like pain, meaning wellness,
movement quality,
power, velocity, movement quality, your resilience, your brake, your ability to change speeds, command, like all the performance, all the wellness stuff, it will regress. To what extent is individual, but it will regress. And there will not be enough time. I don't care if you have 4 weeks. There will not be enough time between high school and summer for you to tap back into the version of you that you were in February. There will not. So listen, what I respect is that I always say, I'm not the police, man. I am not the law. So I will give you my best recommendation, and you and your family, like I will say this to parents and athletes, you know what works best for your family. And I can't be mad at that or this, like that's on you, but I'm going to educate you on what I think is best for here. But it's brutal when we have athletes, because we just know it's like you just did all that work in the off season to be able to be a better version of yourself for high school, and now the same at best version of you in the summer. Like it is 100% loud and clear for the people in the back. You are throwing in the towel for the summer. You are. Not a guess, not 1 out of 10, not 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10. You are throwing in the towel at taking the version of you that you worked to become in the off season and applying that to the summer version of you. You are saying no to that. So there is some world. If you say, yeah, if you're educated on that and you know that, and you still say, we're not going to do in-season training, fine. You know, no one's mad. No one's disappointed. We can't wait for you to come back. We're super anxious whenever that time is for you to come back, and we're going to work like hell for you, like we always do, right? So it's sort of like pick who you want to disappoint. I'm with you. You can't do all the things. However, you need to be educated on when you say no to something, what the consequences of that really mean. Because I find it very freaking hard to believe that the families who say we're not going to train in season are like, we are saying yes to sucking this summer. Like, I really do not think that people are saying that. And that's a little exaggerated. I'm not saying everyone's going to suck over the summer. That's like some Ashley crazy exaggeration. But we are saying yes to being a worse version of her when it comes to summer than we are right now. They're not saying that. And that's why I think every year, this time of year, we're like, who will listen to this? Because the data is just across the board. Yeah. Boom, the way that our athletes come in like May. So I just think that's it. You have to know the consequences of those things, and then you get to decide what you do with that. Not me, not you, but our biggest thing here, it's not even like convincing. You can't convince people to do anything. Right. It's on them, but you got to educate. And I just don't think that that's clear. I really don't think that's clear. And athletes, like, sometimes they're crushing it into like April in high school. So there's like, woo-wee, you know, what they don't understand. It's about that time frame. Like usually it's this like mid-April is when all of a sudden those training adaptations, what you've built over off season, they now start to definitely plateau, definitely, if not now regress. And it is still 2 months away before it actually matters. It's brutal.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think the types of, when we say these things that happen, I think maybe for us to be a little more clear in how we address them. So I'm just going to give like a little example of a hitter. So we had a hitter last year. She was hurt in the fall season. And so she was just lifting, and then started working back into hitting and was really peaking going into high school season. She actually continued to train with us, lifting and then hitting when she could. And so hitting can look a lot of ways when you're incorporating hitting into your training. It can be, you can build it into your team practices. So like basically you're getting this drill set that tells you very quickly, am I on track? Am I off track? It's giving you failure. It's giving you feedback. You can do that inside your high school hitting. A lot of times athletes actually do have a lot of freedom in those rotations to do different drills. And so that's the first suggestion I would make, which is like, you know, the drills, just do your drill set inside those moments. So she lifted, she did all those things. So in the positive, she didn't have the downturn that we would expect if you didn't do those, because she kept lifting, her movement quality stayed pretty good, her power stayed okay. They're still down because workload went up, but everything kind of stayed as is. Now, what I will say is, I was thinking when you were saying athletes are crushing it, the level of play is not the same as that athlete was then coming back in the summer. So she crushed. She was all state. She did great all high school season. And this is, again, an athlete who trained with us. And it took, I happened to be this athlete's travel ball coach. It took 2 tournaments of just terrible hitting. And now the positive for me was, I was like, you are good. You are good. You have we are not starting from the tank. You are just starting from a person who has seen mediocre pitching, who is a little fatigued and needs to get out of that fatigue to be able to start tapping into adjustability. But we are working from a base that's very similar, just tired from where you left, because you kept building your resilience during it. And she ended just like unbelievable. And it was her commitment or recruiting year. She got committed like as soon as it turned on, then the rest of it. But even that athlete coming out of that, who trained in season, had to battle not getting feedback at the level she was going to go into in the summer. So not realizing I lost some adjustability and some fatigue that we had to work out of, because she practiced every day. She, all the things that come with high school season, and that wasn't a pitcher. And so I think the flip side of that, the athletes we have who then they don't lift, they don't do any of the, they're like, I can't throw plyos because I think a lot of times because I don't want to ask, because I don't want to ask that of my high school coach. I'm just going to do whatever. I can't have conversations about workload, or maybe you can't, or maybe you're scared to, or whatever. And so I throw live every day. I pitch in games every day. I never lift. I don't do I can't do anything. I freak out when I don't perform. So then when I do have time, I do a high intensity pitching program. Like that is the opposite. And we see athletes do that all the time. And what they come out of is not the example I gave of the hitter. It's like they start way down here, and we're lucky if by the end of the summer we've scrapped anything together. And the worst case scenario of those athletes is that they're hurt, or they then spend the summer dealing with pain at least. And we're working out of that. And so those are the extremes we see. And so what we're talking about with in season is not take your 3 days that you had in off season and find time in addition to your high school practice to also do that. What we're talking about is you need a support system around you that knows the types of things you are trying to maintain, that make sure the low intensity work that you are doing, whether that has to be fit inside your high school practice, whether you do have some time outside that makes sense, that's not too much workload, that those drills that you are doing are matching what you need, that you have some insight into what am I losing, that we can tap into something quickly when we see that. So you're getting data on some sort of regular basis. Hopefully you're at least doing power or movement check-ins so that we can start to see like, uh-oh, here it comes. And so that we can all get on a call or a conversation around like, what's our plan here? We're starting to go in the tank and we don't want to go all the way down there. That's what player development system is. That's why actually you said, if your only player development system around you is a person who's not doing any periodization, who just meets with you once a week and does random things that come from the game, that's not what we're talking about here. It's not trying to add things like that on top of it. So it's not me saying, you're not hitting good, you better find an hour of time to do our hitting training, and that's the only way you're going to do it. Because that's probably not why that person's not hitting good. It's me knowing what happens in season to make someone start not hitting good. Are we actually
this is
mechanics, or is it an approach thing? How can we tap into that approach thing? There's a lot of things that go into that discussion. And so when people keep with us, it's not that we just hand a program to them. There is a program and there is some conversations around how we do that in season and what we cut when we have games and that type of thing. But there's this like system around, how we're maintaining all of that.
This is literally what college consulting is this time of year.
Yeah.
I mean, so I think there's this real like these high school athletes are working to be able to play in college.
Right.
But they can't figure out a way to keep up with the systems that are mandatory. How many college programs do you think just stop lifting in February and make it to postseason? Like let's take all the top 25 programs in the country who stopped lifting in January because their season started in February. You know what I'm saying? Like that's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And so what college consulting is, honestly, most of the time we're like, the pitchers aren't lifting enough. So, and it's not the lifts from November. Obviously the lifts look different, but we're like, okay, they need more support. Is there a way the strength coach can write them something that's a little bit more about like power activation? It's within this time frame. It goes on these days. Like usually we're trying to figure out ways to add these like lifts, if you will. They're not traditional, but like on the road for pitchers, because they do spend so much time on the road without lifts. So we're actually trying to add things in there, and the strength coaches are writing things. They're bringing their like, you know, little bits of equipment into bullpens when they get on, you know, their travel days, whatever. That's the kind of stuff we're doing. And then we're like, okay, how much did this pitcher throw this weekend? Okay, she should only throw once, maybe twice. She's going to do plyos only on this day and low intensity. Give her the weighted ball. Feel the hand position on XYZ pitch, right? And it's like she, you know, if it's a workload thing, maybe she never gets out of low intensity during the week. If it's an athlete who didn't throw a ton, then we're like, okay, she's going to get 2 bullpens. Day 1's going to look like this. Day 2's going to do this. Challenge her with this. Do this. Like this pitcher didn't throw at all. She may, on April 4th, we might need her. So her program and what she's doing throughout the week is going to look wildly different. Like this is exactly what we do on a week by week basis, is be able to look at all the information, which is going to be their objective ball flight data. It's going to be, you know, reports on where they were command wise, what they had success against, what they didn't, coaches information. And then like, do we have the right plan in place for them, even on a week by week basis here, you know, of just like what they need. And so I just think it's so wild. If that is not how you start thinking in high school, what makes you think that you can keep up with the college setting? So like what we are talking about here is like, is it easy? No, but it doesn't take, it's not like we need you to sleep only 4 hours a night, actually, because you need to get home and you need to then go into your basement or into the, you know, out in the field, and you need to throw another 3 hours. What we are talking about is these like very selective, as you're saying, Krista, sometimes they can be implemented in the high school season. If they can get these lifts done even twice a week, and obviously they're written to be like super like short and sweet, and they throw plyos and they throw their weighted balls at low intensity, that alone is probably enough. And so it's like, it does take so little, but it is thoughtful. And so I think like this is what it takes at the college level. Every week I get on the phone with coaches, and this is what we're designing. So if that's the world you're striving for, then jump in the damn pool. That's what I would say.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say very similar to the athlete I gave. It's just the reason I started with an athlete who did do in season is like, it's not like, and then you come out and you're amazing. It's like, especially because the colleges are you know, they're throwing it all in and it ends in June. Hopefully. The college athletes that come back to us, like they are a mess. Like they have come off season. And so colleges who are trying their very best to maintain all of it, I think it's this combination of, you need the support system around you to give you a shot. You need to be thinking about in season this way of like, what do I need to prioritize? How do I get lifts in still? How do I do the things I need to try to continue to be the best version of myself? And also, how do I stay educated enough to make sure I don't start losing perspective? Because there is a reality of like, there are things that you will just struggle with. You will just struggle with, and you need to be able to not want that to be true, and also have some like real sort of removed emotional conversation around like, I started losing command in X. And it's very similar to of like, we never worked on command of that pitch. So just because your high school coach has a different expectation of you for that pitch, like you have to be able to compartmentalize those conversations a little bit more, or different things like that. And so I think that's really what in season becomes about. And it's just like, you know, it's always hard. It's the hardest, I think, case scenario when someone totally stops anything. They're on that extreme I described. They're like, I'm just going to dive all into high school season. I'm not going to lift. I'm going to do just all in high intensity. I'm going to do all of these things. And then they have success because the level is lower, and they're like, it's going great. And it's May, and they're like, it's going great. Like, I'm so good. Everything's going great. And then they might even make it pretty far in high school season, and they come back to training with us. We evaluate them. Everything is not good, you know, and they go into travel ball. They're like, I'm terrible. It's like
a reality check.
Yeah. And I think it's hard to see that, because it's like, you could have.
It's really hard.
Yeah,
It's really hard. It's hard because we're never going to be like, told you so. It's like, we're on your team, man. So it's like, that's not, but it is like when you can predict what's going to happen, and when they come back and they throw and their tools are bad, it's like, damn it. It is so disheartening. That's the best way. It's so disheartening. You knew it, you saw it, but there's nothing more you can do. It's really, really hard. I stand by the jump in the pool. I think that's starting to drive me like really crazy. This world of like, you want to play in college.
Those habits start now.
Throwing all your capacity into just like all the camps, all the showcases, all the games, all the whatever. The process, the actual trenches of the process to play in college, to succeed in college is all of this stuff that we're talking about. It is player maximization, optimization, development. It's all these little things. It's seeing, okay, it's too much over here. We got to add this. We've got to look at this. This is the puzzle we're all trying to do. So it's like, you've got to reevaluate. You're right. You can't do it all, but you definitely don't want to put all of your time, energy, capacity into all the things that are not it. They're not it. You've got to jump in the pool. You've got to understand these are the type of things that I need to keep track of and need to keep hold of, because this is what it looks like in college too. It's not just to get to play in college. It's what it looks like. You've got to start this process now. Again, not just to get in, because that's the end of the story and now we can post it on Twitter and everyone's life is happy from now on. It's like, no, the process just keeps going. If you want to excel when you get there, you've got to have this under your belt already.
In so many of my conversations, I often am with, sometimes it is from an injury scenario, but sometimes it's not. I just have the opportunity to talk with a parent and an athlete. And this conversation of like, well, you know, her high school coach is very demanding, and, you know, I will say I'll suggest these things of like, hey, you know, instead of doing just a generic warm up, can she do her dynamic warm up? Can she throw plyos? Can she work in those specific drills that we've written? Can we do something that brings what we know she needs into that environment? And I often get there's a resistance. And I oftentimes, I want to say to the parents, and I guess I'm saying to the parents now, is like, don't let the adult hustle culture of, you know, I think we all feel that of like, you know, we work and we get a few hours to ourselves, maybe if we're lucky. And then like that extends to our kids. And it's like, wait a second. They're kids still. Let's see, just from the parent perspective, can we put the brakes on for a second, right? And just think of the general stress they're under. If they are in school 8 hours, you know, consider it a work day, right? It is neurologically taxing to them. I don't know about anybody else, but after a day like that, doing anything remotely physically active is challenging, let alone to the best of my ability. Now, kids have a little bit of an advantage of being much younger, but we have to help them in high school develop this habit of prioritizing their physical, mental, emotional capacity, because they're going to leave for college. And I hope college coaches are listening, is that like they're adults, but not quite yet. So like, be careful, right? You still have this sort of in limbo responsibility that, you know, they've left the nest of their parents who have hopefully helped them to make really good choices about how they spend their time, how they spend their energy and capacity. And college coach is an extension of that. We don't want them to learn that for the first time in college of like, I have this freedom to make all these choices. We want them to make good choices, right? And I think that like that parent-athlete relationship through a challenge like this with a tough high school coach, a tough travel ball coach, putting up boundaries, it shows your athlete that you're there for them, that you will protect them in that scenario, and they learn to prioritize themselves. You kept saying like, you're going to disappoint someone. And I always go like, don't disappoint yourself. You know, like if we're talking about playing through pain, we're talking about playing through energy. That's what I mean. That's where that parent role of like, you've got to help them put up those boundaries. And when it comes to a difficult coach, if they are still under your care and in your house, that is part of your responsibility, is to help them have that conversation, to help them navigate that conversation. It's not to have it for them, right? But a 7th grader shouldn't be putting up boundaries against a travel ball coach asking her to pitch 1,000 pitches, right? A parent's got to step in there and help her make that decision so that she learns that, okay, how I feel, my physical capacity, my soreness, my pain, it's important. And I have to preserve that capacity. And oftentimes when I say that to, you know, kind of say like, you got to figure out what your capacity is and what you can give, it starts to get the gears ticking for the athlete. They're like, you're right. I'm actually doing too much. My body's telling me I'm in pain. I got to listen to that. And
Well,
they need their parents out.
I've had so many conversations where the pitcher's like, I'm the best pitcher on the whole team. If we get to state, it's going to be because I perform. But my coach says I have to pitch 6 days a week, all at high intensity, and I also have to play shortstop and I have to hit and I do all things. I'm like, let's talk about a concept called leverage. When you are
step into your power, girl.
when you are the pitcher, like calling all the pitchers who are the best. There is a real concept called leverage when you're approaching these conversations. It's just the reality. Like, they need you. Remember that. Remember that. So
I was just going to say, I think just like to sum it up, it's why I felt that like Twitter thread so much, because I think this reality of they are children, and eventually in college you're positioning them differently and they're learning to do this themselves. You know, they're learning to do this themselves, and as adults we then do this ourselves. But they are children, and this idea that I can't stand up to this coach and I can't do this, and we have to just put all of their things in silos and help them manage it. It's just such a losing game for that athlete. Like, they're just gonna feel like, if I do this, I'm disappointing my parents. If I do this, I'm disappointing my travel ball coach. If I do this, I'm disappointing my teacher. If I do this, I'm disappointing this. And starting to say, I am not going to allow, and there are limitations to this, and there are, you're going to
unique cases and scenarios, right?
It's not going to be so clean. But I generally, as a parent, am not going to allow my kid's life to be that siloed. It's just not. That's sort of what I was saying with the swimming and how I'm feeling of things. Is like, I'm not going to let it. Of course, as human beings, it's hard. Like, I'm the travel ball coach, and it feels like my world with this kid is the most important world for that kid. Maybe check yourself. But I get how we get into that, and we feel that. And teachers
check yourself. Yes, good one.
And the teachers feel that, like, education is the most, everyone is feeling that. Yeah. And you as a parent has to be able to zoom out and say, like, that just can't. We have to start to piece all of these together. And so part of piecing all of those together is I can't walk into high school season and allow that person to say, this is the most important thing and nothing else can enter it. Like, that just doesn't work. And so there might be give it take, and you might have a conversation. It might not look exactly how you want it to. And you're not going to just like, totally be a jerk in that conversation. And you might say, like, okay, this is what they believe, and they're not going to, and whatever. There's some back and forth of that. But this idea of going into these time periods and trying to like silo off everything like that and just giving into every single person in every single scenario, it just doesn't work, which is why I said what we would never do. We're going to educate, and we might not like the choice you're making, and we might not agree with the person on the other side, but I'm not going to say, I'm going to ignore that because we are the most important over here. And so you just do what we say, and let's ignore all the other things and the reality of your situation. That doesn't make sense, and that just doesn't work. And so hopefully your child is in as many scenarios in their life where everyone involved is also doing that. They might be advocating that math is the most important for your daughter, but I understand that she didn't get to her math homework because in this particular circumstance, she had softball and it went late. Like, so I just try to create those scenarios. I think it goes to those pieces of like, and what you are advocating for is you are the adult. Your kid cannot do that by herself. And so we have to start teaching her of like, hey, Coach John, you can't live in this silo with her. That's just not reality. She has these other
Or Krista, if you do, there's a consequence to that one where they're like, the high school coach says, I have to be at open gym every single morning at 6:00. I'm like, or what? Or if you don't go? What if you go 2 times and you don't go the other 2? It's like, well, then I might not start. First of all, usually those are just like threats. But if that's true, you have to ask yourself, okay, there are consequences, especially when people are so siloed. There will be consequence. We're not saying like, obviously have a conversation and tuck him out of it.
We've talked about
that's the consequence. But the other consequence, if you just go with that, is X.
Right.
It's like, pick your hard, man. You're hard.
I was like, let's keep this one short, and we're 15 minutes in, so we'll wrap up soon. Yes. But we have given this scenario a lot, and it's the most extreme scenario. But we had an athlete who they had 5 a.m. and it was preseason. So just so we're clear, not even season. High school, sprints and burpees, and everyone vomits the whole time, and it's all about culture. And this still happens at this program, and it's mind blowing to me.
Insert the phrase, do we like that?
Yes. And so
we do not.
Ultimate example of I am siloed. I am the most important thing in this kid's life. They must show up. I am going to, whatever. That is the ultimate example to me. And the athlete was falling asleep in class. She had mental health issues that she actually had already. It's not like this gave her, but they were getting extremely raised because of lack of sleep, because of the demands of all of it.
It's dysregulated.
She was hurting. She was having pain because of it. And so when they were saying like, she has to go, we had the exact conversation you said, or what I said. And they're like, she might not make varsity. And I was like, okay, so let's weigh this. She has to play JV versus her grades are suffering, her physical well-being is suffering. And so they ultimately were like, she's not going. And they stopped going. And I get that is like, well, she's not, people are like, she's not being a good teammate. Like there are trade-offs for these things. And so you might be perceived as a bad teammate, and you might not make varsity, but ultimately you have to decide those things. And so to me, the reason I can't even believe that situation still exists is like, it's the ultimate example of siloing. Like my high school program is the only thing that's important in this kid's life, to the detriment of, all of these things. And I just think as a parent, like when it's that extreme, like that has to be clear to you. Like we can't have this type of siloing in my kid's life. Like that just doesn't work. And that's what we dealt with our whole lives. So, I mean, like, it's like, also like, that's what I grew up playing, and it had impact. We were talking about this. I think I said this to you, Ashley, or maybe one of our coaches. I said, like, I think about the types of coaches I played for. There were consequences. I had the yips thrown the first. I couldn't throw front toss. Like there were performance anxiety consequences to the way we were coached. So we know better now. Like we know better now. Anyways, that's a whole nother podcast. So we're not going there, but yes. So, all right. Well, here we go.
I was thinking, Krista, this is turned into a lot like mom life, Like, this is not about life. In summary, life is not about balance. It's about freaking trade-offs. Pick your poison, pick your, the hard, pick your trade-off. It's about trade-offs, but be educated on what one is going to lead to and what the other is going to lead to. And then you're in the driver's seat. That's it.
Yep. All right. There we go.
That's
what you want out of
that. To all. With that, Godspeed to all.
All right. Until next week, we will see you then.
Like and subscribe the OGX podcast anywhere you listen to your podcasts. It helps us, and we appreciate it.